A2CAF, Maris Wicks, Gorillas, Guts, and Gastropods.
Good afternoon. No, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, Ann Arbor District Public Library and also A2CAF. This is incredible. It hasn't even started yet. And I'm like, oh, it has started, but like, I'm so excited for the weekend. It's amazing. So yeah, I'm going to kind of take you through a bit of my personal journey. How did I get here? Not like into Ann Arbor, because I flew on an airplane. I'm from outside of Boston. But kind of how do you end up with the job of a science comic artist and writer? Because it's weird. So that's me underwater. I catch a lot of flack from publishers and people doing promotion. They're like, can you have an author photo of you not underwater? And I was like, no. The other one that I always give them is me hiking and I'm all bundled up at the top of a mountain. For me, I can't do the pose thing. I have to be in my element. So I also want to show you that's me too, which I think is probably a better rendition. It's not, it's not completely realistic, but I love to cartoon. My brain works in cartoons, and it has since I was a young person. And I actually didn't get into what I do from comics. I didn't have a lot of access to comics or comic books. I grew up in the 1980s. But what I had access to was lots of cartoons. I watched maybe too many. No, that's not true. I watched a lot of cartoons, and actually we mostly had public television. So 3-2-1 Contact and Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers were actually huge. And when I think back about creatively what I like to do, does anybody remember on Sesame Street they had really awesome interstitial or like little short animated parts? Those were mind-blowing, and they were, turns out later in college, I learned that they were done by like really small experimental animation groups that got to create these incredible short animations. And then moving forward to Nickelodeon, one of my favorites was Inside Out Boy, who was about this. It was claymation. It was a kid who was swinging on a swing set, and he swung over the top of the swing set and turned inside out. And I kind of accredit that to human body theater. There's other things too. But I kind of grew up steeped in not just comics, but animation, cartoons. I read a fair amount of picture books. My mom was a preschool teacher, so I had access to a lot of stuff. So Maurice Sendak. Actually, my mom's a huge Edward Gorey fan, and I blame a lot of my like morbid, kind of gross stuff on Edward Gorey. The Ghastly Crumb Tinies was one of my favorite books, and it is an alphabet book that is like it was okay for me, but like I can't really recommend it to every kid because it's a little violent. So I want to first answer the question, why comics? Why do comics make sense for me to make, but also for you to read? I'm assuming everybody here reads comics, right? Okay, awesome. Yeah, okay, good. But I just like stumbled into some weird convention of, vintage automobile parts or something. So this is from SpongeBob Comics. I've been writing and drawing marine bio comics for SpongeBob for almost 6 years now, and I'm going to read you Camouflage. Hey, how's it going? I'm a flounder. Having a hard time seeing me? That's because I've got some pretty awesome camouflage. Oh gosh darn it. I knew this was going to happen when I was throwing this together. There is a slide missing. The slide says, with my flat body and sand-colored skin, I have no problem hiding from predators like a shark or sneaking up on prey. I hope that's the only time that happens tonight. Also, notice the fork, my favorite part. I get a little jealous of my neighbors, though, like the cuttlefish. Sup, cuttlefish here. I can change both the texture and color of my skin. Here's me in front of some sand. Here's me in front of some seaweed. Here's me in front of some rocks. Some scientists even tried to trick me with a checkerboard. Nice try. True story. Roger Hanlon's a cephalopod marine biologist, and he took cuttlefish and put them in different sized grids of checkerboards, and there's great YouTube footage of this. Just YouTube checkerboard cuttlefish, because I have a lot of spare time on my hands, apparently. No, this is kind of known within the cephalopod biology community, and I remember watching it and just, this animal was put in an environment that it had never encountered before, but it still could do, well, not the math, but it could still figure it out in camouflage. Some animals just look exactly like their surroundings all the time, like the leafy sea dragon. That's me. I hang out in clusters of seaweed eating tiny shrimp. My fins mimic the shapes of seaweed, making me almost invisible. Note the fish on the bottom. Oh, nom, nom, nom. Oh! Hey, I'm not actually seaweed. Oops, sorry. You just looked like a really tasty salad. So, what I've given you is basically, well, it was supposed to be 16 panels, but there's 15. A one-page comic that gives you scientific information, but it does it in a way that's employing some parts of fiction. These are cartoon characters of animals talking to you, and you know that a leafy sea dragon and a cuttlefish and a flounder do not speak English. They might have their own form of communication, fish and invertebrate-wise. But comics has this great power, and for me specifically science comics, to give a voice to the things that don't have a voice. I told you I was really into cartoons. I could identify and resonate with characters telling their stories. And for me, there's so many incredible stories within science, and it's not just organisms. I think that every element, every molecule has a story to tell about how they interact with other elements and what they can do, different phases, states of matter. I think that there's so many stories within science that need to be told. And yeah, they're being told in textbooks and they're being told by teachers, but I think that comics can give you a different in. And part of the reason why I think comics is because I was a kid that needed another in. I was a kid that, and still am actually, experiential learner and a hands-on learner. And it's great if you're in elementary school and they're giving you all sorts of stuff that you get your hands dirty and you're looking at process and stuff, and all of a sudden middle school happens and they're like, here, read these books, kafunk. Oh, also enjoy like the terrible back problems from lugging around your backpack all the time. You got to take them all home. And that on top of just socially, you're not going to believe it, but I was a painfully shy kid up until college. College gave me kind of a clean slate to be who I was around completely new people. But high school and middle school were really, really hard. I just wasn't a great reader and I wasn't a great writer. And as a result, I had pretty low self-esteem about those two things, about learning academically and also creating writing-wise. Turns out my two saving graces, well, there's more than two. My two academic saving graces was art class and science. Science was the only class that continued to have labs all throughout those years. And I could score well on the labs and bomb the tests. And the science teachers recognized this. They go, Maris, you do pretty well in the labs. Well, what's up? You're bombing these tests. And I go, I'm cramming and I'm studying and I just can't get it. I would spend, 5 times read the same page of one textbook. And it just, and it happens still. It's just how I learn. So I had 1 or 2 teachers that sat down with me and figured out how I learned, and they helped me. And I owe them a lot. So I wanted to bring an illustration from when I was 14. This was the first art assignment that got me thinking that maybe illustration and narrative is something that I could do. And the assignment was, you open your refrigerator and I just like my favorite. This is I was like, Mr. McPhee, thank you for this. And you could do whatever. It could be a still life of the inside of your fridge. I was like, oh, the condiments are revolting. I was really into condiments for some reason. I put mustard on everything, and pickles. I still love pickles. So, working on perspective, it's a little mushy, but this is what kind of kicked off, maybe illustration. Fast forward to 2004. I have graduated college. I now hold a degree in illustration. Every parent's nightmare. No, I'm just kidding. I was fortunate enough to go to school for something that I absolutely loved and something that I could push myself academically. When I got to college, I found myself just thriving in these 8-hour art classes, and also within the, I went to a college that was all art. So there wasn't a lot going on everywhere else. I had to basically give up science, which isn't true, but it felt that way at the time. But English class, I had an English teacher who said, hey, you're pretty good at this writing thing. You should do it more. So I started to kind of build these skills that help me now. This is my first editorial illustration out of college. It was for a company called iRobot. This was for MIT. And they're famous for the Roomba. But they've also done some military stuff. Anyways, I wanted to go. I'm not going to have commentary. I wanted to go Gulliver's Travels. I had literally 6 months before learned how to color in Photoshop. So this was inked and then scanned and Photoshopped and then maybe hastily colored. In the back of my head, I'm like, okay, what am I going to do for a job? And I don't think editorial illustration is a good fit. I don't want to pursue an art career, but I need to make a living. So I'm going to let you know right now, I have been a dishwasher, a camp counselor, a sailing instructor, a baker, a farm worker who also gave orchard tours. For a little while, I was an EMT, which I'll talk a little bit about later. That was an adventure. I just kind of had all these odd jobs, and it's not unusual within the arts community. If you are, an artist, a musician, you're working in acting, like you have a day job, and that day job's not wrong. It's not bad, and I loved all those jobs. And for a long time, I kind of was just like, I'm going to do these because I like them and they pay the bills, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I did a year of AmeriCorps, which is domestic volunteer service in the US. And I got set up at the Providence Children's Museum, and it was like a year that blew my mind because it was a year where they're like, hey, people learn really well through play. We're gonna teach you how to play and encourage others to do so. So I learned how to play with infants up through grown adults. And I was like, this isn't, wait, I'm learning how to play. It just kind of deconstructed how we learn. And that was formative for me. I was like, I feel really passionate about education, but I don't want to be a teacher. I want to do out of school time education. So from that job, I ended up at the New England Aquarium as an educator, and I was there for 8 years. Now, 3 months after I got hired at the aquarium, I got my first book deal, which was like, how do I deal with this? I'm working full time, but I also want to do this. So I can't remember what slide's next. Oh, this was supposed to be up here for me being like, what do I do? Well, you guys already, I have, sorry, I remember the segue. While I'm getting passionate about educating in this like informal setting, I've been making mini comics. I've been going to conventions that are festivals that are not unlike A2CAF. My side time has been going to SPX and MoCA, and those are all acronyms for small press conventions, and just looking at kind of the community that was there and making mini copies and photocopying my mini copies and mini comics and selling them. Human Body Theater, a 240-page graphic novel, started as a 2x3, 24-page mini comic called The Digestion of a Peanut Butter and Jelly Sandwich. So, blame the EMT stuff. So I came to this conclusion that I wanted to fuse the two things that I loved. I loved science and science education, and I loved comics. And my dream job was science comics. And I was like, how do I do this? I'm not a writer. So the cards aligned in the most spectacular way. And First Second Comics, which is a publisher, approached me with a script written by one of my favorite comics writers, Jim Ottaviani. And they go, do you want to try out for this book? We think your style might be a good fit. It's not a guarantee. Just try out for this book. And I was like, like I didn't literally poop my pants, but I metaphorically pooped my pants. I was like, ah! And this was like your dream job on a platter, and I wanted to do so well. So I read the script 4 times in a row, and I sent off a bunch of sample pages, and they're just like, you're not gonna hear back from us for a while. And then I was going to Heroes Con, which is a convention in Charlotte, and I look at the seating plan, and they've seated me next to Jim Ottaviani, who's a local. Where is Jim here tonight? Hey, Jim, what's up? I figured I would tell the story. And I haven't heard from First Second. I go, this is going to be awkward. And I'm like, I really want to do this book with you, and you're sitting next to me for 3 days of a comic convention. So on the Thursday, I might be exaggerating, but on the Thursday, I get an email from First Second, and you got the book. And I just like, happy dance. And then Jim and I spent the whole weekend nerding out, and he gave me a stack of photocopies this big. And from there, I also Googled a whole bunch, and I started working on primates. This was my dream job, and I was 27 or 28 years old, and I acknowledge that is a privilege to have that happen so young. And I know it feels not that way because sometimes you look online and you're like, oh, this 16-year-old's doing this amazing webcomic. But realistically, this is a hard field to break into, and it's hard to know what you want to do, what your dream job is. I know that I still have other dreams, because once you do your dream job, you have to be like, well, what's my next dream job? My dream job has to evolve as like a Pokemon, right? So I was working full-time at the aquarium, so this book did take me a long time. I was working at nights and on the weekends to make primates, and it was great. I'm going to do a little process stuff, and there's actually a couple pages from primates in here, and I'm going to read you an excerpt from it, and then I promise there'll be an intermission where you get to get up and eat food and walk around, and I'll keep talking, but it will be individually to you, and then I'll tell you about that in a second. So I got the script. Comic scripts look kind of similar to a movie or a TV script, or even a play if you've read any of those before. And it's so much fun because you get my brain starts painting the picture of what this could look like. And then thumbnails are little itty bitty drawings. I did these ones on just like photocopy paper, and they were about 2 by 3 inches, just really rough sketches to get the page layout and composition. And from there, pencils. And each one of these stages has an editor in between. So when I talk to students, I go, it's kind of like working on a paper, and you submit your paper and you get feedback from your teacher. It's similar with an editor. You want to make sure your storytelling's clear and that the story flows. And it's the same thing for writing as well. And then inks, and then colors. So I want to read you the page leading up to this, just kind of to get the pacing for this. And I should mention, I got excited. Primates is a graphic novel about the early careers of Jane Goodall, who studies chimps, Diane Fossey, who studied gorillas, and Verite Galdikas, who studies orangutans. So it's about field research And pretty formative stuff. These women kind of were breaking into a field that had been dominated by men, and so they were some of the first women to actually do field work and kind of change the scene for science, which is amazing. Just to get to like illustrate their lives was fun. So this part happens with Diane Fossey, who's there's a pew pew. Okay, sorry, I love laser pointers. This is Diane Fossey. She is with a photographer and 2 guides, and she's going to see gorillas for the first time. So, an overwhelmingly musky barnyard, yet human-like stench. And these are pea lines, the stinky pea lines of gorilla pee. And you've got, that's I could say urine, but pee is more fun. 1 syllable. Aye. That's my best impersonation of a gorilla. But the sound, really something. Nothing can possibly prepare you for such an avalanche. Aye. A little bit of a beat. I probably shouldn't be too loud. I know that I am mic'd, and the poor guys in the sound booth. So you're the reader in this panel, but I'm going to show you that you're also someone else in this panel in just a second, or someone else. The guide is cut through the foliage, and you're the reader, but you're also someone else. Diane Fossey is pushed in front of the hole, and this is what she sees. So when I say that you're the reader, those 2 panels before, you're also the gorillas seeing that happen. So comics does this incredible thing. I know I kind of did my jokey, like, why comics with the camouflage thing, but there's something else that's happening in comics and graphic novels and these stories. You can tell a story without words, and that's not to say that the pictures are better than the words. It's just a completely different reading experience. You get to be Diane Fossey seeing gorillas for the first time. And you could write about that, and it would be a very different experience, you reading the prose about her seeing them for the first time. And it's a different experience. It's not a replacement. But I think that there's a power in comics to let you experience something for the first time, to let you see behind another character's eyes, to let you see from a different point of view. And that is a very, very incredible power that the medium has. And that's part of the funny stuff is great too for me, but I think that there's a power that it has to tell these stories. So yeah, we're gonna jump forward to the next thing I want to talk about, human body theater. So, thanks. Primates was my first book and my dream came true, but I usually talk about this as being my book baby. This was the first book that I both wrote and illustrated. And I should tell you how it happened. And I remember this, and I forget, poor Jim, I'm going to tell another Jim story. While we were wrapping on Primates, I really wanted to work on another comic, and I didn't really know what to do. So I go, Jim, do you have any books that we could work on together? And he was like, I've seen what you do with your mini comics. I know you a little bit. I think you should try and write your own book. And I was like, well, at that point, I still had that leftover, I'm not a writer, I can't write. And even beyond that, I kind of talked a little bit about middle school and high school. I had some pretty bad self-esteem considering academic stuff. I mean, there was parts in my life when middle school and high school that I was like, you are stupid, you can't do this. And that was maybe pervasive, is that the right word? It stuck with me, and it kind of went in the back of my head. And even now as a grown adult, sometimes that voice comes back, and I was like, shut up, voice. Don't tell me I'm stupid. You don't know. I can do research. I can make this right. So I was trying to figure out what would make sense to pitch as a book. And Human Body Theater I mentioned was this tiny mini comic that I'd done for, it was a mini comic subscription thing called Uncle Envelope. It was really cool. You could sign up and you get a mini comic a month. And I don't remember what month it was, but I go, you know what? I really feel strongly about the human body and taking care of the human body. I got my EMT my last year of college. Part of that was not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. And this is like a weird thing. You're an art student, you're about to go into your senior year, and you're like, what could I potentially do as a job? Maybe work on the back of an ambulance. And I will say that didn't come out of nowhere. There's kind of a two-pronged reason for that. And I've always been fascinated by the human body. I will talk about poop for probably more than what is healthy to you. Even though I was a shy kid, I really I think the way that we work as organisms was always fascinating. It goes back to being kind of in love with science and just you're basically the best and closest science experiment you have to yourself. And when I was a kid, I did struggle with, when I did get sick, I was pretty terrified of that. Even just, throwing up was like the worst thing. And, it's funny now, but when I was in 4th grade, I was in a production of The Nutcracker, as sometimes poor elementary school children are forced to do. So I was like really unhappy in a tutu. Friday night, Davis Thayer Elementary School, and I did not feel well. So, I'm just like, like all over one of the rats. It wasn't like the Rat King, but it was bad. And just like tears, because I'm so embarrassed, and there's puke in my tutu, and that's one of the few things I remember from elementary school is that story. So I wanted a way to like kind of revisit that. It doesn't show up in the book, but and I'll share this because I don't usually share this. I usually do with high school and college students, but maybe I won't share it. Oh, gosh darn it. I'm usually better about this, but you guys are an awesome audience. In college, I lost a friend in an accident, and I was the first person on the scene. It was not good. Sorry. You'd think, after over 20 years, I could talk about this. So, when something scary or sad happens in my life, the way that I deal with it is I learn as much as I can about the situation. And my therapy to deal with this was to be, most people would be like, maybe I'll see a trauma counselor or a therapist. And I was like, I want to work on the back end of an ambulance and just be exposed to accidents constantly. But what the takeaway was that the EMTs and the medics that were there that day, they were really amazing and really kind. And aside from that, there was other stuff where that one time when I was 14, I was babysitting my sister and she put her arm through a window and I had to call. And this was more funny because she's fine and she has a cool Frankenstein sketch. But I had interacted with emergency medical professionals for quite a few times for being 20 years old. And I go, those people are sometimes the best thing on one of the worst days of your life. And I go, if I could be the best thing on a bad day in someone's life, that would be pretty awesome for me. And this isn't the sad part, but I got my EMT and it was great. And I went and I started observing with medics in Cambridge, Mass. And I go, this is awesome. I'm going to observe. I'm really feeling like I can do this. And I get 4 shifts into it. I'm like, I can't do this. But the important part is that it was helpful for me. I knew it wasn't lost. And part of me felt like a failure. But it also was important to do something, try your best, and know that it's not the right fit. And it ended up being the right fit, just in a different way. So, sorry, I took you down a sad path, and now we're going to talk about pooping and farting. So the bottom line is when you never know what's going to inspire a story or a book. And sometimes, and the reason why I share this with high school and college students is sometimes you can take a really bad experience and you can turn it into something good. And that's how I feel about this book. So I think when this book came out, there was a lot of that happening too. I poured my literal heart, because, into this book. So I want to take you through just 2 pages. These pages are in the room today. I'm going to read them. And this is basically from the, is it from the blood section? It's from the blood section, because why not? Blood's great. Speaking of injuries, let's talk about cuts and scrapes. And I should back up by saying that is your narrator. It's a skeleton. For each chapter, the skeleton acquires a new system and just adds them until the skeleton turns into a fully formed human being at the end. Spoiler alert, it's kind of me. And actually, on the second to last page of the book, the skeleton has got all the parts and zips up the skin and runs off stage, and you can see the skeleton's butt. And my 3.5-year-old niece calls that anti-Maris naked time, which is my favorite thing ever. She flipped to the page. She's like, I want to see anti-Maris naked time. And I was like, yes, that is your anti-Maris's cartoon bottom. So, speaking of injuries, let's talk about cuts and scrapes. A cut or scrape causes some damage to blood vessels, but mostly just the capillaries. This just isn't my day. Once the damage is done, it begins a series of chemical reactions. Can I get a bandage or something? First, a protein in the blood, fibrinogen, transforms into threads of fibrin. These little threads of fibrin crisscross with each other. There's actually not little cardboard boxes inside your blood right now, just disclaimer, forming a meshwork at the site of the damaged blood vessels. Then platelets stick to the fibrin and to the walls of the blood vessels. All these characters have kind of been introduced. I know the language, I'll talk a little bit about the languages in a second. Big pile! Finally, red blood cells join in the fun, sticking to the fibrin and the platelets. With all their powers combined, the fibrin platelets and red blood cells form a clot. But the body isn't done with this cut just yet. Inside, white blood cells spring to action, seeking out germs like viruses and bacteria and eating them. Om nom nom nom. I'm really a big fan of the om nom 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 nom. And when I'm feeling sad, I go to YouTube and I search cat eating sour cream. Because there's a cat that's licking sour cream off of a spoon, and it's so psyched about it that's going nom 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 nom, and it's just like it's great. It's like my favorite thing. The clot dries up and hardens. This is called a scab. This scab helps to keep out germs and dirt so your cut can heal, and it will eventually fall off. Boink. Oh. Underneath, your skin mends itself with strands of tough white proteins called collagen. If the cut was large or deep, a scar may remain. Scars are usually white, light pink, or light brown, and shiny from the collagen used to heal the skin. So in this book, I'm doing something that is, I think, almost a little risky. A lot of times I'll read this section without the comic. I'll just read the script. And I actually think it's pretty hard to digest, no pun intended. I think it's pretty academic in its writing. I think that it's high school level biology in terms of the terms I'm using. I try to be careful about not introducing new terms. It is constructive. I do introduce these scientific terms. But what carries, I think, this is comics. And it tickles me to hear about a second grader reading this book that is high school level science, and to know that framing is everything, and there's a way to make information accessible and engaging, and it doesn't have to be a slog. So it's hard. As a creator, I can look back and be like, oh, I would have written this differently. And what I'm focusing on now with books that I'm writing is one of my favorite writers as a kid, and even now, is Shel Silverstein, and I love poetry, and I love the way words play. And I didn't realize, kind of actually until talking with someone earlier, that poetry is kind of a way to play with words, like drawing is playing with pictures. So I'm thinking more a little bit about lyrical and poetic parts, and like, what does it sound like when you read it out loud? So one of the books that I'm working on might have the subtitle of it being a musical. We'll talk about that later. Science Comics Coral Reefs. I got this book. First, I can actually ask. My publisher asked. They go, would you do a book about coral reefs? We're going to kick off this series called Science Comics. And I was like, yeah, I think that's awesome. I would love to do that. I've been at the aquarium I was at the aquarium for 6 years by then. So I had a pretty substantial body of marine biology knowledge and just global ocean science. And I said, coral reefs, that isn't necessarily what I would pick, only because they're so far from me. So I'm from outside of Boston, and the closest thing to me is the coastal ecology. So the intertidal zone, which there's actually a comic in here about the intertidal zone on the wall. And coasts are more accessible to people than coral reefs. So this is kind of my backhanded way of being like, you know what? I think I need to see a coral reef in real life. Because like most of the people, not just in this country, but on this planet, my exposure to coral reefs was through books, through documentaries, and through aquariums. That was the closest thing. And to call it a reef and aquarium is a bit of a stretch, but to see live corals, the closest thing was the New England Aquarium in Boston. So for primates, I did not get to go to Africa and see the gorillas or the chimps, or go to Indonesia and see orangutans. So for human body theater, well, I had my own separate EMT adventure, but that happened years before. I didn't get to shrink down and go inside the human body. So for coral reefs, I said, you know what? I'm starting to be almost a full-time cartoonist. I was 2 days a week at the aquarium at this point. They let me wean myself down so that I could put more attention to comics. So I go, you know what? I'm going to put aside some time and some money, and I'm going to get scuba certified, and I'm going to see a real coral reef. Darn it. So I got scuba certified. I don't think I have the picture now, but I got scuba certified in the Boston Harbor. If you can drive in Boston, you can drive anywhere in the country. If you can scuba dive in the Boston Harbor, you can scuba dive anywhere. We're talking water that's about 56 degrees, really choppy waves, and 2-foot visibility. That means between me and that podium, that's about all I can see. So it was great. It was awesome. On my 33rd birthday, I got my scuba certification, and I brought cake, of course, as one does. And so I was like, who wants cake? All dripping with seawater. And they're like, I think we're okay. I'm like, more cake for me. Swimming in scuba dive makes me really hungry. So I am going to read, I'll back up a little bit. I kind of used coral reefs as the poster child for the ocean, as the mascot for the ocean, because coral reefs only cover a very small percentage of this planet. They're 1% of the planet. But they are home to over 25% of the animals that live in the ocean. They are you can't take them out of the equation. They are important to all life on this planet, and not just marine life, and that's what I'll talk about in a second. I use them as a jumping point to talk about global ocean health and global ocean systems. So the water cycles in this book, photosynthesis is in this book, climate change is in this book, like really looking at the whole world, because I think if we look at this whole planet as our habitat, it's where we all live. It's kind of a nice unifying thing to be like, oh yeah, we all call this planet home. And that was kind of what I had going on in the back of my head. So I'm going to read from you a section that talks about photosynthesis. Take a deep breath. Now take 9 more. Those 10 breaths you just took, 7 of them were all thanks to the ocean. Whoa. Photosynthesis is the process used by plants to take in carbon dioxide and convert it to oxygen. This is my carbon dioxide song. It goes, eating up the CO2, farting out the oxygen. And I, just any excuse to draw farting, I was like, you know what, I gotta have farts in this book. There's actually a running joke that farts and then like nudity. Because there's a little tiny naked boy. It's a young Louis Leakey in Primates where he's running naked. And I know there's a lot of little kids there. It's like naked little boy. And obviously Human Body Theater has that. But I was like, I got to get some bodily humor. There's no butts in this comic, but yet there's farts. So I always joke, I go, you know, if you're ever stuck, because photosynthesis is a big word, and so is like the process. I go, if you ever forget what it is, just sing the song to your head. Don't put it as an answer on a test, because you might not get credit. But it kind of helps stick. For a long time, humans assume that trees and plants are responsible for the world's oxygen production. Trees do help, but they only supply the Earth with about 30 to 40% of its oxygen. No offense, trees. None taken. And after all, we only cover about 8% of the Earth's surface. To find our main producers of oxygen, grab your microscope and head out into the ocean. So the book is narrated by this fish with glasses, which is also kind of me. I'm a yellow prawn goby inside. Someone was like, why does the fish have glasses? And my answer was like, why not? But honestly, it's actually easier to emote with pupil stuff, and I usually just draw dots for eyes, so the glasses actually helped for reactionary purposes. I went into a whole cartoon soapbox with that answer, which was great. The person was like, I didn't expect this answer about the arbitrary fish glasses. Just because you are tiny does not mean that you are important. Sorry, does not mean that you are not important. Sorry, phytoplankton. And there's actually little tiny phytoplanktons. Isn't that right, little dudes? Cue the slide of farting phytoplankton. They don't have butts, but they can still fart. Poot, 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 poot. So, algae and phytoplankton, an umbrella term for all plant-like plankton, are contributing the other 70% of the world's oxygen. I didn't know this until I started working at the aquarium. It was news to me. And it might be news to some people in the audience as well. This is something that I never learned in school, and I don't think we actually knew that much. The ocean has played a major role in global climate for billions of years, starting with cyanobacteria. We really owe it all to them, cyanobacteria. Just take a moment to think, cyanobacteria. And the poor cyanobacteria, like anything that's been around for a long time. When I was your age, I had to float around in the ocean all by myself. Oh, this story again, says the poor little diatom. So, again, similar to Human Body Theater, there's some pretty big science stuff going on in this book. But my goal was to kind of make it accessible. And in the back of my head, you know, people are like, who are you writing books for? And I do really I have students in mind just because I was a kid that would have really used this, and this would have helped. So selfishly, I'm writing not just for students, but I'm writing for young Maris, and I'm writing for Maris now because this is fun for me. I think that if you're enthusiastic about something and you want to share it with people, that's contagious. And other people will get excited about it, whether it's gorillas, gastropods, or what was the other one? Guts, thank you. I was almost going to say gonads, and I'm like, that's not it. I was like, oh, my, where's my brain right now? So, collaboration. I absolutely love the time that I collaborated with Jim on Primates, and it's a really nice brain break for me to work with a writer. It's a lot of brain power for me to make a book, and I think for any people to make books. My books tend to be very resource heavy, and you don't see a lot of what goes into that because it's me just submerging myself, immersing myself in all this information to figure out how to teach it. And in some cases, one of the books I'm working on right now, which is Science the Musical, I mean, we won't really talk about that, but I am literally learning science. I'm going back and having to relearn science and then turn around and say, how am I learning it? How will I teach it? So there's this really complex process, I think, for me with writing nonfiction comics. So I've paired up a couple times. My friend Rosemary Moscow is a fantastic artist and writer. Bird and Moon is her website. She just does really incredible stuff, and she's also a writer. She actually wrote one of the science comics, the solar systems one, so that will be out. I think, Mark, is that coming out? Like I looked at Mark.
I should know, but I don't.
I believe I think it's coming out in like May or June. It's soon. I think it was a spring release. So she's just a delightful human being. And we're like, you know what? We feel really passionate about urban ecology and kind of getting people to connect with nature in their own backyard. And we were looking at stats before we started. This is a webcomic that ran for 2 years. And we go, 80% of the people in this country live in and around an urban center. That's a lot of the population. And I don't want to discredit people who live out in rural areas, because a lot of the species we cover do live in rural areas as well. But the ability for these animals that live in cities to adapt to an environment that has only been around for 200, 250 years is miraculous. So I'm going to read you a comic that we did together called Feral Pigeons, the City's Greatest Romantics. And Rosemary would usually write and do a rough layout, and then I would turn around and then do the pencils, inks, and colors. There was a few of them that I did write myself, because she was like, well, you know more about slugs than I do. So I was like, yeah, I love slugs. That comic's up on the wall too. So, Rock Dove Love. Pigeons mate for life. Oh. To woo a female pigeon, a male pigeon begins with a respectful bow. M'lady. He coos a passionate love song. I want to know what love is, and I want you to show me. Just imagine every pigeon walking around but that's their inner song monologue. And then the heart eyes oh my gosh, she's singing my song. Next, he tenderly nibbles his beloved's feathers. Nibble, 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 nibble. And then he throws up in her mouth. So we were kind of walking this, and she knows my sense of humor, so we're kind of walking this line where we know that gross facts get, you'll remember this. You might not remember me singing I Want to Know What Love Is, but you'll be like, oh, pigeons throw up in each other's mouths. But it's just kind of this, you have to try hard not to be fascinated with the natural world. I think the biggest hurdle is having access to this information and in certain ways. So that's kind of what was driving Your Wild City when we were working on it. And we both would love to do a long form graphic novel about urban ecology, and that's, you should see how big my stove is. I have 5 back burner projects. There's so many things that you could share with people. So that's we ended that. The archives are online. You can read through them all. I think we did about 52 of them, and they're fun. And some of them tackle things that are actually help with animal safety. There's ones where if I see this baby animal, what do I do? And it's a question that a lot of people ask. And sometimes people intervening in situations with baby animals is not good for the baby animal. So we try to do a little bit of, not PSA, like public service announcements, but kind of educating people about the nature around them as well. And then we also focused on a lot of bug stuff, because I know that a lot of people do have phobias or fears of bugs. And it's funny because Rosemary's least favorite one is house centipedes. And she was like, I can't even look at the reference photos for this. And I was like, don't worry, we'll put it in roller skates or something. It'll be fine. I was thinking of actually the boggart from Harry Potter when the spider gets roller skates. And I was like, yeah, put everything in roller skates. That's scary. It's great. Sorry. So after coral reefs happened, it was my first taste of really getting out and having an adventure and having that experience inform the book that I'm working on. And there's a disclaimer there. Coral reefs actually doesn't really feature me scuba diving at all. You don't really get any of that in the book. It was kind of just the experience of seeing the animals interacting on the reef, underwater. Getting to interact with scientists and other educators was really important to me. But I wanted to try and fuse this way where I could take what I'm learning and have that experience be a little bit more direct. Have the conversations with scientists be more transparent and me translate them. So long story short, I get back from the scuba diving trip, and I'm kind of freaking out because I want more experiences like this. The day I get back, I run into a friend from Australia who just happens to be in town, and I'm freaking out. I'm like, I want to do more stuff like this. This is so amazing. I just need. And she's like, your country has this grant that sends artists and writers to Antarctica. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, Google it. So I did. This was in 2015. I put together my grant, submitted it. And it took a year and a half before I heard back. And I was told that this is a very competitive grant and most people don't get it on their first try. Surprise! I was surprised too. And it was this long process of being like, am I going to be in Antarctica for 3 months? And am I going to be able to make this book? And it was weird to kind of be in limbo for those 2 years. And then they don't even tell you that you have the grant when they want you. They're like, we're going to need you to do this medical stuff. And I was like, okay, send me what the medical stuff is. Do I have the grant? They're like, we're going to need you to do this medical stuff. And I get the thing, and I'm like, okay, 8 vials of blood, all this stuff, 12-point EKG, and at the bottom it's like, rectal exam. Oh, come on. So I always joke with people, I'm like, if you want to go to Antarctica, you might have to have your doctor stick your finger in your bum. Like just, and again, the whole time I was like a little uncomfortable. I'm like, this will make great content for this comic. But my pitch was in Comics Forum, and I wanted to document and share the life and science of Antarctica. The United States has 3 stations in Antarctica, and there's incredible science happening there. And it's not just penguins and seals. There's the southernmost active volcano. There's a lot of access to space because Antarctica is dark for 6 months out of the year, so there's lots of space telescopes. There's incredible geology stuff down there. There's a lot of climate science, which is probably obvious. I mean, I did spend 2.5 months literally under the hole in the ozone. You got to wear a lot of sunscreen. So I was in Antarctica for 2.5 months. I came back. It was still cold, actually, when I came back. There was days I look at the weather and I'm like, it's actually colder in Antarctica, or colder back home in Boston than it is in Antarctica right now. But it was crazy. The sun didn't set for 2.5 months. It was an incredible experience. I got to draw seals. I got to interact with over 16 different science teams and work with their scientists, see what they were doing in the lab, have conversations with them about their work. And then I filled four sketchbooks, more than that, notebooks, kept a daily journal, and this was just kind of, it's a new process for me. But from that, and this is a spread from just one of the pages. And there's a lot of notes that kind of don't make much sense, but for me it's important. There's a lot of stuff where they're looking at how they weigh a seal, because you don't just go up to a 1,000-pound seal and be like, I'm gonna pick you up. It doesn't work. So they do all sorts of stuff with imaging that they can actually calculate the weight of a seal. And it's kind of like the basic length times width times height. It turns out there's a constant for the density of a Weddell seal, which is just too funny. I'm like, how'd you figure that one out? It's not that hard to figure out from a big population. But again, yes, I could do some of this research by Googling these animals and talking to scientists on phone, but the experience of going there and having that access was incredible. Looking at it through kind of the eyes of a cartoonist being down here. And this is just the example of all the clothes you had to put on before you went out and did field research. I mean, I'm wearing 2 pairs of socks in there and 3 pairs of pants and mittens and gloves. And the seals, in the meantime, they're good. They are fully adapted to deal with this environment. And that is amazing, because they don't go anywhere for the Antarctic winter. They stay. Humans usually don't stay, and there's about 250 people who stay at McMurdo Station, which is where I was, but you don't really go outside much for those 6 months where there's no sun. So the animals that do live in Antarctica are incredibly well equipped to deal with this extreme habitat. I mean, humans don't belong on this continent. We figured it out because, we're kind of smart, kind of. But it's a real privilege to be able to be there and have access to the scientists, but also just be there in a capacity to visit this place on Earth. And with that, I would actually work. One of the science teams, talk about small world, was out of Mass General Hospital, and I go with them on the ice for the day. And I go, you all look really familiar. Have we met before? And it turns out we were tabled next to each other at a free event at the aquarium 2 years before, and we had both done each other's activities. I was like, oh, I checked my heart rate when you put my hand in ice. And they're like, yeah, we colored in coral reef. It was actually right when coral reefs launched. We colored in coral reef animals and put them on the reef. And I was just tickled. It was great. So we talked a lot about outreach, because our common denominator was the aquarium had worked with both of us to develop outreach to get science out into the broader public. And there's some pretty crazy stuff that we talk about, like dissolved gases. And pretty much if you're a Weddell seal and you're in Antarctica, you can dive down to 200 feet, and your body is specifically adapted. I mean, they have some pretty big organs, because this seal was about the size of me, and its heart is the size of my head. There's some really amazing, and obviously I had to get inside the seal, because, human body stuff and anatomy. But to be able to have this, there's going to be stuff in this book, science-wise, that hasn't come out before, or that it hasn't been accessible before. And that's really special for me, to see this amazing science that doesn't usually reach a lot of people, just because they don't have communicators. There's not really a great PR system for Antarctica. So I didn't ask First Second's permission, but I want to Mark, I hope you don't mind that I'm going to show some sneak peeks. Is that okay? Mark's like, no, you can't. I'm working on Antarctica, I'm working on Science the Musical, but what I'm working on right now is another book with Jim Ottaviani, and it is awesome! It is about women in the space program, and I am so excited. I am just tickled. I mean, I feel bad waxing on, but like, Jim, you are one of my favorite science writers. So it's an honor and a privilege to work on a book together. And the narrator was an astronaut who flew on the shuttle twice, and I got to meet her. I met a real astronaut. Anyways, so I'm going to go through the next 2 pages fast because I don't want spoilers, but I get to draw, for me as a kid growing up in the 80s, like I remember Sally Ride, and like there was some formative stuff happening when I was a kid, and it's really cool. The book kind of spans late 50s, early 60s, up through the end kind of now, but there's a lot of really cool history that I think needs to be shared, and it's awesome. So I get to draw a lot of scenes from inside the shuttle, and these are the thumbnails / pencils. My thumbnails are ridiculously detailed, and just like I am like a kid in a candy shop. Like the space shuttle program was like when I was a kid, so this is just so much fun for me. So, and I didn't mean to go through those fast, but I don't want you to read what's on there. I didn't black them out. So, I wanted to end by saying thank you to you all in the audience who've listened to me ramble on about some pretty weird stuff. Thank you to Ann Arbor and the library and all the amazing folks who put this together. Thanks for letting me. I felt like I stylistically kind of took over. Like I've never had a solo gallery show. I've done a couple poster things, but like to do something in this capacity, it was so nice to feel like a part of this and then come participate. So thank you all so much. I'm so excited to kick off this weekend, and yeah, we're done. Woo!
This program was recorded on June 15th, 2018 at the Ann Arbor District Library.